Hey guys, welcome back to Sunday Youth Bible Study. Glad that you are here tuning in with me to study this week. Get your Bible out, be ready with a pen if you could. It's always good to have your study tools with you, and open up to Exodus. We're in Exodus chapter 14. Last week we saw the Passover. We saw that wonderful blood of the Lamb covering the Israelites, and what a neat picture of Christ and salvation that is for us. And this week we've got a really, really great lesson. I think it'll be really helpful for you, so be ready to listen, ready to study on your own if you would. So the Israelites, as we're going to read, are coming to the Red Sea, and deliverance doesn't look like what they thought it was going to look like. And that's a really key lesson, really key thing that we can take from this, is that deliverance doesn't always look like what you expected it to look like. But like the Israelites, we often think, let me go back to where I was. That would be better than this. I'm not going to be delivered. Everything's falling apart. I can't trust God in this. Send me back to slavery. When we're on the cusp of deliverance, we're on the cusp of what God is showing us, where He's bringing us, and we need only be silent like He commands us. And so deliverance from God often looks different than what we expect. As we're going to read, the Israelites faced certain death, and God had made a way for them to be miraculously saved by parting the Red Sea. Probably not what they were expecting at all. Now, fast forward, we're all sinners, and we face certain death in our sin, but God made a way for us to be miraculously saved also by sending Christ to die in our place for our sin and to rise again. So after the plagues, and after the final plague of the firstborn, the Pharaoh commanded the Hebrew people to leave Egypt. He was done with them. He was done with all this. In fact, the Egyptians even handed over silver, gold, clothing to hurry the Hebrew people away. Get out, get out, get out. But, as you know, Pharaoh had a very hard and impenitent heart. He did not have a changed mind for long. It didn't take him long to gather chariots to pursue the Israelites. Pharaoh had lost his laborers, and he had determined to retrieve them. We must keep in mind that the Israelites were not a people of war. They weren't skilled or trained in defense and battle. In fact, they didn't even possess the right kind of weaponry, as the other nations probably had. They had been living in total servitude to Egypt. The threat of battle would be exceptionally frightening for them. It would be terrifying. It would be certain death for you. They simply weren't equipped. But God is omnipotent, right? He is all-powerful and in all control. And if He has declared, I will save you, then certainly you can lean on Him. They could lean on Him and trust in Him to be their deliverance. God is all-powerful. Nothing is beyond the scope of God's power, so long as it does not contradict His own nature or law, because God does not lie either. God has power and authority over the universe that He created, from the largest solar system to the smallest particles. And affirming that God is all-powerful doesn't mean that God can sin. Obviously, we know that He cannot. He is holy and perfect and just, and that would go against His perfect moral nature, and His character of who He is perfect. So as Christians, we can rest in the belief that the God who has all power is good. And if He is for you, who can be against you? That is a very key and heavy thing to keep a hold of. If the all-powerful God, who holds the universe in His hands and accomplishes all that He desires, if He is for you, then the response is, who can be against you? Who could be against me? There should be great comfort in knowing that our all-powerful God is working for our good and for our joy, and our joy is to ultimately to do his will, really. So, you live in America, I live in America. America is largely known as a very free country. We always have been. Some of those things may have changed in recent times, but by and large, we're still a very free country. We enjoy freedoms that other places in the world might not get to enjoy. They might not have the liberty of our liberty. You appreciate that, right? I appreciate that. I appreciate my freedom. And if given the option to give it up, likely we wouldn't, right? I'm not going to just voluntarily say, I'm tired of this freedom stuff. I'm tired of being able to go walk down the street and broad daylight whenever I feel like it. I have the freedom to do that. It's the best thing I can come up with is a walk. But right before God parted the Red Sea, the Israelites wondered if it might be better to go back to Egypt and live in slavery. To go back and to live in slavery where they came from. They couldn't see the deliverance that was just ahead of them. God was about to deliver them mightily, just like he promised he would, because he's trustworthy. And they couldn't see that, and they were ready to go back. They were ready to call it quits and say, this is too much. Let's get out of here. Their eyes were on the sea. They were on the impossible task ahead of them. Have you ever felt that way? You have an impossible task ahead of you. There's no way you can complete it. There's no way you can bring it to fruition. There's no way you can survive this oncoming thing. It's too much. It's too great. It's too humiliating. It's too whatever. Fill in the blank. You can't do it, is what the blank is. I can't do it. And your eyes are on the sea. Well, God's plan was to deliver them by parting that sea. Okay, so read with me. Chapter 14 of Exodus, verses 10 through 14 to start with. Ready? As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were Egyptians coming after them. The Israelites were terrified and cried out to the Lord for help. They said to Moses, "It is because there are no graves. Is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Isn't this what we told you in Egypt? Leave us alone so that we may serve the Egyptians. It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." But Moses said to the people, "Don't be afraid, stand firm and see the Lord's salvation, what he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you must be quiet." Another translation says you need only be silent. Same difference. So the Israelites realized the Egyptians were chasing them, and what did they want to do? They wanted to go back. When the Israelites left, they may have thought the worst danger was behind them, so they were overcome with fear and wondered why God would lead them to a trap. They wanted to turn back to Egypt and back to slavery. They'd been delivered from slavery, but what was ahead of them seemed scarier than what was behind them. It was unknown, and they were unable to deliver themselves yet again. Now, I know, Egypt wouldn't be better for them, right? But it was all they knew. In a moment of terror, they questioned if staying enslaved would have been better. They forgot what they'd seen God do in Egypt through the plagues just real recently. So, apply this to yourself. Apply this to yourself. Don't always sit and think that you would have been smarter than the example in front of you. Has following God ever felt too difficult? Has what God has called you to in your life ever felt like too much? Have you ever had a keen sense of your own inability in something, and it's been tempting to turn back because of it? We react to difficult situations a lot like the Israelites reacted to theirs. When life gets tough, or we face circumstances that we didn't expect, that weren't planned for, that we can't see through, we are tempted to turn back to our Egypt. What's your Egypt that you're tempted to turn back to? What is it that you look back to and think, I was better off here, let me go back? It can be painful when God refines us, but if you're saved, refining is what is going to take place. We may have to walk away from sin that we felt very comfortable in or attached to. I mean, we definitely will have to do that. We don't get to stay in it. The enemy wants to convince us that going back to our sin would be easier, that living in sin is better, it's more fun, it's more beneficial, it's fill in the blank. In reality, it makes us slaves. Look at Moses' instruction over in verses 13 and 14. What would it look like for us to allow God to fight our battles, to be quiet? I lost my video. This happens to me periodically. I'm really sorry. But you still have my voice. Thank goodness. So, what would it look like for us to allow God to fight our battles and to be quiet, to allow Him to accomplish what He said He will? Why do we struggle so hard with this? The Egyptian Pharaoh and his army charged towards the Israelites, who were trapped by the sea. They had nowhere to go. Instead of telling them to prepare for battle or to run, Moses told the people to simply stand and watch. Can you imagine how vulnerable they must have felt in this? Most of us would want to act in that moment. Most of us would look for ways to fight back and to run away. But God wanted to show them. He wanted them to stand in faith and watch Him gain their victory. God would gain their victory. He would fight and win the battle, and they would witness this. God often asks the same of us when we face problems. We often look for ways to fix them on our own. We look for a way out. We allow our minds to wander away with worry and anxiety. But we can trust God to fight for us. His deliverance is better than any false sense of victory that we might gain on our own. We need to be silent and watch the Lord fight for us. So pop over to Exodus 14, verses 21 to 31 now. We'll finish out with this. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. The Lord drove the sea back with a powerful east wind all that night and turned the sea into dry land. So the waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with the waters like a wall to them on their right and on their left. The Egyptians set out in pursuit, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, his horsemen, and went into the sea after them. During the morning watch, the Lord looked down at the Egyptian forces from the pillar of fire and cloud, and threw the Egyptian forces into confusion. He caused their chariot wheels to swerve and made them drive with difficulty. Let's get away from Israel, the Egyptians said, because the Lord is fighting for them against Egypt. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea, so that the water may come back on the Egyptians, on their chariots and horsemen. So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea returned to its normal depth. While the Egyptians were trying to escape from it, the Lord threw them into the sea. The water came back and covered the chariots and horsemen, plus the entire army of Pharaoh that had gone after them into the sea. Not even one of them survived, but the Israelites had walked through the sea on dry ground, with the waters like a wall to them on their right and their left. That day the Lord saved Israel from the power of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. When Israel saw the great power of the Lord, that the Lord used against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and believed in Him and in His servant Moses. So why would God lead His people into this seemingly impossible situation of being trapped between the sea and the Egyptians? I mean, it seems silly now that we've read the whole story, right? Clearly, God had a plan. He's almighty. Of course He could deliver them. It seems so plain and simple. Yet in our own circumstances, We don't see God as our mighty deliverer like that. We don't trust him as our mighty deliverer. We're more like the Israelites, where we're ready to go back to what's familiar and easy to us. Sometimes our road to deliverance doesn't look like what we expect. Sometimes it first takes us through deep waters. The Israelites' situation seemed impossible, and their first response was fear, as often is ours. God purposefully directed them to the sea because he had a mighty plan to deliver them there that would bring glory to himself. Not only would it show the Egyptians the power of God, but it would teach the Israelites that they could depend on God for deliverance. God is all-powerful, and we learn those same things through our own traps. The Israelites had to step into the sea to be free. What do you think they might have experienced stepping into? It would certainly be terrifying, right? With the ocean rising up as a wall on your left and on your right. We're told that God sent the strong east wind to split the sea, causing two walls of water to rise up. I mean, was the water roaring and loud, or was it eerily quiet? I mean, did they fear the water collapsing on top of them? I mean, there's a lot of people going through this situation. I'm sure there was a lot of things going through a lot of hearts. They couldn't have predicted that this was the way to freedom, but they had to trust God and take physical steps to be delivered. And sometimes we have to also. The miracle at the Red Sea was a mighty act of God, but it points to an even mightier deliverance, salvation from sin. Our slavery is to sin. Everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin. That is what the Word of God teaches us. When Jesus was crucified and resurrected, he provided our ultimate deliverance. Like the Israelites, our situation was hopeless before Christ made a way. He made a way for us to be forgiven. We can never be free ourselves, but God sent Jesus to be our great deliverer. So overall, after we've read over all of this, what do you think this passage teaches you about deliverance, and how can you apply that in situations in your own life? How can your day-to-day be affected by our story today? This is one of the most well-known stories in Scripture. It teaches us a great deal about God and the way that he delivers us. He shows up in might and in power, and he accomplishes his goal. And man, we need only be silent and watch the Lord work. But do we trust him? Do we believe that he's going to do this work? We see that God sometimes allows us to be in difficult circumstances. He's not being cruel to us, but it's to display his mighty hand of deliverance to us and to those around us. It shows us that God is all-powerful. He often asks us to be still and trust him instead of fighting on our own, finding our own deliverance, leaning on our own understanding and falling back on our own escapes and things that we run to that provide a little bit of relief from the pressure and anxiety. These are not saviors. These are taskmasters. These are more slaveries that God wishes to deliver us from. He is all that we need. We can trust him. He is with us even in the deep waters. He remains in control when our circumstances are chaotic or seem chaotic. And deliverance isn't always immediate relief from a difficult situation. Sometimes we need to remain in those things to learn to trust God. Sometimes we need to remain in those things to learn to let go of the control we think we have. But we do have God's presence with us in these circumstances. He is the God of all comfort, and we can be comforted in them. That is it for this week, guys. Appreciate you being with me here to the end. And as always, I'll be praying for you, and I will hopefully catch you next week.